to look into the halls and see if we can gather people. One of the nice things about this symposium is that by day 2, we all feel like old friends, and we love the break time as much as we enjoy the formal session time. And it gets harder and harder to get people to gather into the sessions for the actual conversations. I've heard a lot of chatter in the hallway over the last couple days about excitement for this next panel. I call Imam, Magid, Pastor Bob Roberts, and David Saperstein the three amigos. I have heard others refer to them as the three musketeers, and I won't say who because I think it is blasphemous and also not good for the oversized egos of our panelists, but someone referred to them as the Holy Trinity.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm not going to use this unless I get a sign-off from Daniel, because he has to live with these folks on a regular basis. And he's shaking his head no. He doesn't think we should go there.
It doesn't work so well for two of us. So.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Yeah, Bob seemed excited about it because it sort of pulled this group all into the Christian orthodoxy of theology. This session is about multi-faith engagement, religious freedom, and building peace. And we have with us here today 3 of the world's leading experts and practitioners of this very topic. Bob, David, and Mohamed are the founders and the energy and spirit and intellect behind the multi-faith neighborhood network. And this is an effort to bring together groups in various cities of at least a pastor, a rabbi, and an imam to become deep and meaningful friends. And they do this through a retreat where there's a significant investment of effort in developing relationships, and it's become a very powerful model, not just in the United States, but globally as well, in a number of countries, about how to develop these networks of deep relationship that help really do a lot of good in the world, but also prepare for when the dark night comes, which unfortunately it does from time to time whenever there are acts of violence motivated by religion, especially against people or places that are sacred. The bios are in the agenda, so I'm not going to rehearse those here, but instead of doing that, I wanted to begin on quite a personal note and invite each of these 3 men who I revere and love to tell me why they care about religious freedom, because they put a lot of effort into religious freedom. And I'd like them to just share with this group just a brief explanation of why religious freedom is important to you. And David, we're going to move back and forth, but why don't we start with you, and then Bob, if you could answer, and then Mohamed, and then we'll shift gears and talk a little bit more about MFNN.
For me, engaging for religious freedom has both an historical resonance and a personal one. I'm Jewish. Tragically, Jews have been the quintessential victims of religious persecution over the centuries. often driven from the lands we had dwelled in simply because of what our beliefs were, that we worship God in a way that was different or that others didn't understand. Our customs and observances were often strange to people, and they didn't understand. People are often scared of the other, and quintessentially, we were ethnically cleansed from numerous countries over the centuries. We were the victims of pogroms and violent actions against the Jewish community. If there's one lesson from Jewish history, it is the harm done when good people stand by while their neighbors are being hurt. And as a Jew, I felt my place was to play a role in confronting religious persecution and oppression wherever it would be found. One other personal note, my father was a beloved congregational rabbi for 60 years, serving some of the largest congregations in the world and some of the smallest. And my mother, very active in civic affairs. The two of them managed, mostly before jet airplanes, on a salary where my dad was never, until he retired and went to some of the largest congregations in the world, never made over $45,000 a year. They managed to get to 80 countries across the globe. You should look at their passports, countries that have disappeared that we have. I mean, it's just extraordinary. And everywhere they went, they met with religious communities and Jewish communities, including Jewish communities, but not limited to them, and would come back with stories about the challenges that they face, and particularly victims of oppression and persecution. So it was part of my childhood growing up. It's part of the heritage, I think, of any Jew to stand up for the religious freedom and religious equality of every faith and every human being.
Thanks, David. I like the combination, that synthesis of both a historical reason and a very personal reason for caring deeply about religious freedom. Bob, over to you.
This is probably bad to say, but I didn't care that much about religious freedom. I wanted to be the next Billy Graham and just baptize everybody. I didn't want to waste my time with interfaith, multi-faith. Let's do the real serious stuff and, get everybody baptized. Properly, Brett, properly. And so, so growing up, this is the truth. My wife and I wanted to be missionaries, so we went to seminary, got my doctor's degree from the premier school to be missionaries. But my wife was in 2 car accidents that killed her sisters, her mother, crushed her body in such a way that she'd have to have all these surgeries. Well, she didn't, but it was God takes bad things and makes good things come out of them. And so our church wanted to work somewhere in the world. And so we adopted Vietnam, which, those of you that are Vietnamese, I didn't like Vietnam. My dad pastored near an Air Force base, and he buried a lot of soldiers. And every Sunday afternoon at the little parsonage, my mom would set up a table, and the soldiers would come and eat. And it would get traumatic when one of them didn't make it back. But there was an atheist who came to faith in Christ in our church, and that I'd started. And he said, Bob, we dropped a lot of bombs. Why don't we go do some good in Vietnam? So I agreed to go. So we go to Vietnam, and it was opposite of everything I knew. I mean, I'm capitalist, they're communist, I'm Christian, they're atheist. But for whatever reason, I was able to look beyond all those differences, and I saw some of the most beautiful people in the world I'd ever seen. I'd watch what were those, Sylvester Stallone's movie? Not Rocky, but the other one.
Die Hard? Rambo?
Yeah, Rambo. I'd see Rambo, and I'd go, get him, get him, get him. And after I'd been to North Vietnam several times, I'd go, run, Charlie, run, because I'd become close to the Vietnamese, and they mattered to me, and I loved them. And we've been there for 30 years. My wife got back the morning I left for being here. And so I learned, here's what happened. I knew the Bible, I knew missions, I didn't know people, and I didn't know the world, and that was horrible. And I saw people, and I came to love them and respect them. And then they asked us to do the same thing with the Muslims. I don't have time to tell you the story, but a man named Prince Turki al-Faisal of Saudi Arabia, through some unique circumstances, we became and are friends. And he challenged me one day. He said, Bob, you need to reach out to the Muslim community where you are. I said, Your Highness, I'd be like you starting a Baptist Sunday school class, in Mecca. I don't think it'd go over good. But I'm in Dallas, But he said, Bob, you ought to do it. So there's a mosque when you fly into DFW Airport. And so I decided I was going to go there. So I showed up at the mosque. And you got to understand that a Baptist pastor in Texas showing up at a mosque is a scary thing. That's a very scary thing. But I showed up and I said, look, I'd love to be able to get to know you, build a relationship. And so we planned this event. We have phenomenal barbecue in Texas. It's the best. And so
Well, just a second. My wife is from Tennessee, so I need to stand up for the dignity of Tennessee barbecue here before we go on.
Not even close. And so what happened was we ordered 2,000 halal beef ribs. We had to get them shipped in from Kansas, and we had a beef master to cook them where they would be halal. We expected 200 or 300 Muslims to show up.
So you're saying Kansas barbecue is really where
No,
it's at?
I'm saying Kansas halal beef ribs. That's not the barbecue. So we barbecued them, and we had over 2,000 showed up. And it was incredible. And it was just incredible. All these Muslims are at our church. We'd never experienced that. And our church was excited, and some were nervous about it. They started calling us the Muslim church. I can tell you how to grow a mega church. I can also tell you how to shrink it real quick. Start becoming friends with people that your tribe doesn't like. But we did. And so here's where religious freedom comes in. So I got hit so much by my own tribe, which, by the way, prophets are more for your own tribe than they are for somebody else's tribe. But I got hit by so much, and the Muslim community around the world saw that. And as a result of that, it endeared me to them. And so I wound up working with Muslims all over the world. And then this guy comes into the picture, and I won't go there yet, I guess, but he comes into the picture, and we come up with this idea. I'll stand up for Muslims in America. I'm an evangelical. I'm a Baptist. That's part of our history. Don't agree with your religion. Still want to baptize you, Magid. You know that. But having said that, then let's get the Muslims to stand up for the Christians in Pakistan. So we literally did that, and we signed an agreement. And then, so it was a story with me. This guy is brilliant. He's one of those, maybe the smartest man in the room. Don't be offended, Brett, but he probably is. And I had no background in legal or things like that, but I had a story. I had experiences, I had relationships. And so what I did with those, I found I had power to convene. I had 30 years of credibility I'd built up in the ministry, and Magid did too. And all of a sudden it changed everything.
Now, when you started talking about the beautiful people of Vietnam, I was pretty sure you were going to mention me next.
No.
See, Bob and I met for the first time in Vietnam about 20 years ago.
That's right.
And we've become friends, really.
And that's why I love Mormons. Because when I learned to love Vietnamese, they were the ones that I was afraid of the most. And then y'all ran a close second. And then y'all were a piece of cake because we have similarities. So.
Well, by my count, then, Texas barbecue comes in third behind Tennessee and Kansas City. But Mohamed, before Bob interjects a rebuttal, why don't you tell us why religious freedom matters to you?
Thank you so much. Actually, first time being in Utah, and I'm enjoying myself here, and beautiful mountains. Well, thank you for inviting us. I'm originally from Sudan. I grew up in a city where we have Christians, Coptic Christians, were my neighbor. My father was a clergy, and he rose to be the head of the clergy in Sudan, Secretary General of the Supreme Council in Sudan. And my father came to this country for treatment, has kidney failure, for kidney transplant. And I was supposed to be the donor to my father. And when we came to United States, it was the first time in my life I met a Jewish person. And that happened to my father, doctor, one of the doctors. 3 doctors that took care of my father. One of them Jewish, one was Muslim, and one was Christian. And they become friends of my father. They were very curious about this clergy. Man asked him a question about Islam, the Christian and the Jewish doctor. And when my father passed away in 1990, those doctors actually cried, shed tears for his death. They become very close friend of him. And I said to myself, of 3 doctors for having different faith background, try to heal a man, maybe if Jewish and Muslim Christian get together, they can heal the world. You know, and then I became an Imam in America, and 9/11 hit, and our mosque was vandalized. There was writing over the wall, "Go back home, you don't belong here." The second day, actually. When I went to the mosque and I saw that, and we suspended the school. We have children in school. I said, children should not come to the mosque for a few days to see what will happen. Washington Post wrote an article about what happened to us. And next day, Jewish Americans, Christians Americans, Sikh, and Hindu showed up at our mosque with flowers, big postcards. They signed, the children have signed big poster for us, say that we would like to welcome your children to our places. Jewish women wore scarves, accompanied Muslim women to shopping. When I saw that, I said, we have to do something also regarding minorities in majority Muslim countries. We have to stand for other people as people stood for us. And therefore, I initiated an idea, and then Sheikh Bembeya led it, Marrakesh Declaration. We decided to work on producing a document in protecting religious freedom of minorities in majority Muslim countries. But something very interesting happened. There was a church in Pakistan was burned down. And 2 ladies in my community who went to school in that church came to me and said, we would like to fundraise to rebuild those 2 churches. And I said, yeah, we can do that. He said, we can do that at Adam Center? I said, yes. For they raised the money, and they flew actually the bishop from Pakistan, and they gave him the check. Because we as Muslims living in America, seeing minorities being mistreated in majority Muslim countries, it really gives us moral obligations to stand for them. And I would like just to say that now knowing Bob and David travel them around the world addressing the issue of religious freedom, I come to realize that people really are looking for a model, an example. When we tell them how the Christians are defending Muslims in America, and how the Jews showing up in the mosque in difficult time, and how Muslims showing up for others, it becomes inspiring to them to see this kind of model. This is my story.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story. And Bob, you do run a mega church in Dallas. We know that. And Mohamed, tell a little bit about where the Adam Center was when you began it and where it is today in terms of some of your operations and programs and just size. It's really spectacular.
When I joined Adam Center about 8 years ago, we were about 200 people praying Friday prayer. Now about 30,000 people. The mosque have 7 branches. One of the branch actually is in the synagogue for 15 years. The synagogue and the mosque. On Friday, it become a mosque. On Saturday, it become a synagogue. And in Ramadan, at night, we have night prayer. For when I asked sometime a member of my community, I said, what did you pray this Friday, last Friday? He said, I prayed in the synagogue. One time we have a guest visiting Adam Center, and I asked one of my staff, I said, what did you pray? He said, in the synagogue. He said, what did he mean by that? I said, I actually prayed Friday prayer in the synagogue. By the way, many mosques in America in the 70s and the 60s and 80s, they started in churches. Churches have opened their door for many mosques in America. For now, we have 24 sermons every Friday, and most of them are volunteers, as you do in your church. We have largest Boy Scout, Girl Scout program in the area, and we do social services, and interfaith become part and a center actually in our activities at Adam Center.
That's a remarkable journey that you've been on through that service in the Adam Center is out sort of near Dulles Airport, so in Northern Virginia, and it's a remarkable story and a remarkable facilities that you have there. Bob, let me ask you to just sort of tee up MFNN for us. Tell us a little bit about what it is, what it does. Please specifically describe the retreats and what happens at the retreats. And maybe you can also explain why you took your Muslim friends out shooting in the desert of Texas not long after 9/11.
I'm not sure which piece that is. Stop me if I don't do it right. Okay. All right. So, okay. What did you ask me? You confused me. I'm sorry.
I wanted you to tell why.
It's hard being with this lawyer.
I wanted you to explain why you took the Muslims out shooting in the desert of West Texas right after 9/11.
I got it. Okay. So this guy and I were at this thing in Nepal where they brought out some extremist, shall we say, Muslims and some of the people that were Christians and other different minorities. And so at the break, it was, David would have loved it. Smart intellectuals, me and Magid were going to sleep. And so Magid and I go, this would never change people that need to be changed. I mean, this may be sharp, smart stuff, going to academic book to be published, but what could we do? And so we started thinking about our path. How did I get to where I was? How did he get to where he was? And we came up with this model of a retreat. So we came up with the idea. So what I did, I got 12 of the most significant megachurch pastors in the U.S., we got 12 imams with them. We flew them to Texas to a dude ranch, and for 3 days, that was our first retreat. And when they got there, all the pastors stayed on one side, the imams on the other. They didn't like one another a whole lot. The pastors said, we will not come if you tell anybody that we're here. So no pictures, no nothing. I mean, it was that serious, really. And so Magid and I both put everything on the line to do this. And so we started and we do it, and by the third day, they were laughing. And they had all the pastors that said, I want you to come visit my church. And most of them wound up introducing the imam to the church. Then we reversed it, and we did the exact same thing with Pakistan. And the Qataris, frankly, helped us do this. And so we flew 7 or 8 pastors out with 7 or 8 imams that Magid and I knew. And we did it, and then we came together at the National Cathedral in D.C., and we signed a statement that we're going to support religious freedom together. And so from that, we're now in 20 cities in the U.S., 15 countries, and it's growing. So we have to constantly raise resources because people will ask us to come, but obviously it takes money to do that. So the retreat is 2.5 days, and we do it in the middle of the week because of all the worship days. So we go Tuesday noon through Thursday lunch, and the first day you just get to know one another. That's it. 3 20-minute lectures. That's it. So no lectures. We're going to team you up the whole time. Let me back up. The National Prayer Breakfast, a guy named Doug Coe was a close friend of mine. He asked me in 2017 to invite a Jewish leader to speak with me and a Muslim leader. And so Jonathan Sachs as the rabbi, Sheikh bin Bayyah, who Magid's close to, as the sheikh. And there are 5 main sessions. We didn't speak at the one with the president, but there are 5 main sessions. And so we did. Doug was on his deathbed and literally called me up and said, Bob, I'm coming into my office. I want you to have those guys there. I want to talk to them. And so he looked at me and he said, you need to involve the Jews in this, Bob. Literally in front of everybody with Jonathan Sacks. Well, how do you say no to Jonathan Sacks? And this is the truth. The only Jewish person I really knew was you and one other man I knew, but I didn't know about him. And so literally that's how the Jewish community got involved. It was very important because we're very conservative. He's not. And I thought, that's going to mess it up. It was the best thing in the world because it forced us all right, if we're going to make room around theological differences, then I'm a Baptist. How do you live with a liberal? What does that look like? How do you recognize they're created in the image of God in this sort of thing? So that's
Are you saying David too is created in the image of God?
Partly. He's got most of it there.
By the way, when we went out, they asked Muslims to start shooting. I said no, because it's entrapment.
And I do have a picture.
We cannot have Muslim shooting.
I do have a picture, but I won't release it unless you mess with me. So, but what we did was we came up with a little process. And so the second day is you get to know. Then by the end of the first day, everybody's going, oh, this is wonderful. We like one another. Then the second day, you talk about what you like about one another, how they see you, and what you don't like about one another. And that's where, as we say in Texas, and I'll say it in a nice way, it hit the fan. And I mean, everybody's angry and everybody's upset and they're pouting and they're yelling at one another and so forth. But we were able to calm it down. And we've learned if you don't go through that at a retreat, it's probably not going to be a good retreat because people aren't being honest. And then we come back, we start wrapping the day up. We talk about religious freedom. We use Sheikh bin Bayyah for the Muslim, the Marrakesh Declaration, and Thomas Jefferson from a Western perspective. And then we talk about what could we do together. And the final day, that's all we do. We map out our plan. So there are 5 things you have to do when you leave the retreat, and I'm done. Number 1, go to one another's home for a meal. We're trying to humanize one another, get to know them. I mean, there's nothing like hanging out. Son, if you want to go to Vietnam, get to know somebody and want to know what Vietnamese seafood is like, hold your hand up, son. He will take you. He's the man. But there's something about sitting at a table and eating a meal with somebody. Number 2, we try to get them to visit one another's place of worship. Now, that doesn't always work for different religions, for different sects within the religion. So do a soccer game, but do something. Have a picnic together. 3rd, and this is huge, we want to do a community project together. And you got to agree what it is. Here's what we've discovered. Most people make it about head. We're going to talk a lot. And then if we can agree, then you go to my heart, then I'll work with you. We reverse the order. Kind of do what Jesus did. He starts with the hand. He healed people. He didn't say, do I agree with you? Do you want to agree with me? Accept me right now. No, he serves them. He heals them. He feeds them. Start with the hand. When you sweat together, it captures the heart. Now you're ready to have the deep conversations and the hard questions. The reason sometimes interfaith dialogue gets in trouble is we want to ask authentic, real, legitimate, deep questions, but we don't have the strength of relationship to be honest with one another. So anyhow, we go hand, heart, head, and then finally stand up for one another. And so we do, and it's hard, but it's critical when the bad things happen to stand up. We could tell you all kind of stories about that, and then finally spread it out. So the most exciting thing we're doing right now, Brett, we're doing Train the Trainer. And so we'll go in and do a national retreat in a country and bring in pastors, imams, rabbis from across the country. And then after that national retreat, we'll do retreats across the country. Then we train them to do the retreats. We're ecstatic this year. I know there's somebody from India. Our goal is to go to India and involve Hindus in this. We want to go to Vietnam and involve Buddhists in this. We want to expand it. We're going to keep doing the Abrahamic faiths, but there's a whole big world out there. We want to ease our way. So that's what we do.
Yeah, I think it's such a lovely model of this sort of building first the relationships and doing something useful and important together, and then seeking agreement rather than the other way around. So I think this shift from sort of interfaith dialogue to multi-faith partnership is really something that you've helped really lead as a group. David, let me ask you to shift gears a little bit towards our conference theme, which is the link between religious freedom and peacemaking, and reflect a little bit on how the work of MFNN and more broadly your efforts. You've been chair of the USERF, you've been ambassador for religious freedom for the United States. Tell us a little bit about the connections you see between the religious freedom work you are so involved with and peacemaking, which is also, we know, very important to you.
Let me start in response to that with what you just heard. And I don't know whether this is self-evident to everyone. It's obvious, but it may not have occurred to you. We're talking about an interfaith, multi-faith coalition that involves an evangelical, a Jew, and a Muslim. One obvious question is, why not Catholics and Protestants if it's an Abrahamic coalition here? And as Bob used to say, you know, you guys have been at it for 80 years. Here, you're in all kinds of coalitions with each other. Every locality has a clergy in America, has a clergy coalition. Usually, here, you know, it started with Catholic, Protestant, Jews. There weren't many evangelicals. We haven't had that experience. And these three communities have an aspect in real life of suspicion about each other. If we can do it with this in model, groups that often can be at war, and I don't mean literally at war, but at war with each other, suspicious of each other, if we can build these kinds of coalitions, then the possibility of real peace, of the kind of peace, you know, in Hebrew, the word shalom, it comes from the Hebrew word, the infinitive lishalem, to make whole, to heal. It's not the absence of war. It is actually healing the things that divide us from each other. If we can do this here, we have a basis for peace, and there's a lesson in that, it seems to me, in terms of the broader question that you just asked here, Brett. You've heard some wonderful talks to answer the question Brett just asked me about the relationship of religious freedom, to which I've devoted a big part of my life, and the issue of peace building. If you look in real life over the last 40 years, in locales around the world, so many countries in Latin America where the religious communities, the Catholic community particularly, has played a key role in bringing about peace, at least for a period of time, and ending strife there. If you look at the Philippines, if you look at Ireland, if you look at the CAR and DRC, you can go around the world and find long periods of time where Protestant and Catholic leaders played a pivotal role alongside diplomats in actually bringing an end to strife that had plagued certain countries for a while. Doesn't always last, unfortunately, here, but God knows how many lives were saved simply because we were able to make a difference. Or we've worked together in terms of policy and advocacy that has led to peace. So look at Imam Magid and I worked together on the Sudan issue. There was a period of time long before the current strife, even before Darfur, where there was a 17-year civil war that killed more people and displaced more people than Bosnia, Kosovo, and Rwanda combined. And the world basically ignored it. But a coalition of evangelicals, of the Reformed Jewish movement, the liberal end of the Jewish community, and the Catholic bishops and then later joined by the Black Caucus on Capitol Hill, actually worked together to push the United States government to play a role. We wrote and drove through Congress the Sudan Peace Act. Here, 4 of us went in when George Bush was elected, sat down, and 3 weeks after they took office with Karl Rove, persuaded him to appoint John Danforth as the president's personal negotiator. Everyone knew how close he was to Bush and that he had the president's backing, and he helped significantly in the negotiations that ended that civil war. Again, it didn't last, but the countless lives, I mean, already 2 million dead, 5 million displaced, hundreds of thousands, not millions of lives were saved for a period of time here that really made a difference because of the religious community looking together. So, Brett, in peace building, whether we do it directly ourselves in helping to negotiate differences or through advocacy pushing governments who are either parties or outside parties to help the parties involved in strife resolve it, the religious community can play a role here. And then there has to be transitional justice. And very often, think of Bishop Tutu in South Africa, very often it is a religious community that plays a role in transitional justice, in coming to grips. We know what repentance looks like. We know for sins against God, you got to ask God's forgiveness. This is a period in the Jewish calendar where it is the days of awe. We are 10 days of assessing ourselves, what we have done and where we failed to do better. And we know sins against God, you have to ask God's forgiveness. If sins against a person, you have to ask the person's forgiveness, and you have to heal the harm that you've done. The wonderful words of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who worked so closely with Dr. King, it may be where injustice rules that some are guilty, but all are responsible. And we have to remember that in transitional justice plays a role. And finally, in offering a theory and an institutional framework for reconciliation, the religious community over and over again plays a powerful role. So if we're to have that piece of healing, the religious community must play a role. And I'm really proud of the work we've done in putting seeds of that in not just here in America about communities that have felt somewhat estranged, but all across the globe, going into countries that didn't have a tradition of interfaith, multi-faith interaction, dialogue, cooperation, and building their first network and then investing and supporting their working together for a period of time. You begin to do that all across the globe. And as you said many times, 80% of the world's population has a religious identity. Think also of the 10 million houses of worship globally that exist. If every one of them was serious about environmental issues, in how they used energy, purchase recycled goods, were advocates in their congregations, in their communities, what a difference that could make in the environmental battle as well here. There's so much value added the religious community brings in the struggle for religious freedom, for peace, for protecting God's environment, and we're proud to do this work and make a little contribution to that.
Thank you, David. Bob mentioned Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. For those of you who may not be familiar with him, he was the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom. And 2 little touch points on that, if you would like to learn more about him. Google sometime Jonathan Sacks, anti-Semitism, and European Union, and you'll get the most moving speech you've ever heard about anti-Semitism and the threats that it poses to Europe. Second touch point, the very last public interview Jonathan Sacks had before he died was with Paul Edwards at the Wheatley Institute about Jonathan Sacks' last book. And if you Google Jonathan Sacks and Wheatley Institute, you'll hear the voice of this unbelievably important religious leader in his final public statements. And both of those are well worth your time. Now, one of the things that we're the International Center for Law and Religion Studies, Bob, and Cole and I, when we're talking about religious discrimination, we often say the first two places you should look are registration laws, which is one of Cole's primary areas of expertise, and then land use and zoning, which is Cole's one of his many other principal areas. When he started teaching at BYU Law School, he was actually teaching local and city government, and criminal law. So how he got to law and religion is a long and twisted journey. But we were talking the other day, Bob, about law and relationships. And I knew that Latter-day Saints sometimes had trouble before the zoning board. Have mosques ever had trouble before the zoning board, Mohamed? I'm not quite sure.
Number one.
But
Challenges.
tell us about the Northwood Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas, and how you got through your challenges with the zoning board, thinking about this dichotomy between law and relationships. Was it a good lawsuit that solved your problem?
I've never told this story publicly, so this is the first time I've done it. I hope I don't get anybody in trouble. When we bought our church, you only need 23.5 acres to grow a church to 20,000. That's it. If you know how to do the buildings and land and parking, that's all you need. You can do it. And so we bought 58. I was a young guy. I was reading all this stuff, and I was friends with Rick Warren, and so I made sure I did it all right. And the idea was then you get it, build in a good place, and then you sell the other half of the land, and you get debt-free. And so it got time to sell our land before I handed our church over to the young man who's now leading our church. And one of the councilmen was just difficult and would not approve the sale of the building. And there's no reason for it. And the other councilmen were pushing against it. And that other councilman had affected another councilman. And so it was about the time of elections for new city councilmen. And so we were concerned. We went to the zoning board and we didn't win. I was depressed. What are we going to do? We got to sell this to push everything forward. And so this other person came up and said, hey, there were two of them. We're running for office and we want to be the new councilman. And if you'll endorse us, then when we get on there, we'll make sure that they allow you to sell your land. I said, look, I can't do that. Number one, it's illegal for a place of worship to publicly endorse. They do it, but it's really not. It's not ethical. And I don't know the legality. I'll leave that to David. He can answer that. But so you can lose your nonprofit status if you become political. I know that. And so I said, I can't do that. And they said, well, if we bring people for you to talk to, I said, I can talk as a citizen one-on-one, but that's it. And so we did. We shared it with some people. Some of our members did, but never announced it, never talked about it, whatever. But one of the Muslims in the community, I'd helped the Muslim community a lot. And I'd stood up for them. There's all kind of stuff that it made national news one evening because the new Republican leader for Tarrant County was Muslim. Y'all may remember. And even Ted Cruz came out and said, no, this isn't right. And so I publicly, stood up for the guy. They said, you've helped us. We want to help you. There's only like 150 Muslims in my community at that time. And so I said, well, thank you, Magid. But what's 150 votes? Well, they had the election, and he mobilized the whole Muslim community. And here's the crazy thing. That new councilman won by the new councilman got in that we wanted in, but they won by only 30 votes. Had the Muslims not helped, it would not have happened. And so Magid decided he wanted to run for city council. And so he said, now, I know you can't publicly, but you can privately and on your own stuff. And so I've never done this before, but he's a Muslim. But I said, this is Magid, my friend. Vote Magid. Here's what's crazy. Magid got the third highest amount of votes cast ever in the history of Keller, Texas. But it was after a recall election that was controversial, and the other two people won. So it was just, but now he is involved in politics in a very real way.
Well, I think it's an interesting story that sometimes even the groups that we think of as religious majorities can suffer discrimination. Mohamed, tell us a little bit about your experience with the zoning board. This is actually a lovely story.
Yeah, when we started planning to build Adam Center is located in 2 counties. Made it very easy. Half of it in Fairfax County, half of it in Loudoun County. But I have to stand before 2 boards. Therefore, the neighbors really didn't want us to build the mosque. And as you know, the Department of Justice, they can sue counties if they do not allow a mosque to be built. And they have done that many times. I said to my community, we're not going to go that route, legal route. Let's go to relationship route. But we want to every neighborhood something called Home Owner Association. And we met with them. And we asked them, what are the things you need to see happening in order to build this mosque? They gave us their conditions and so forth, and we met all the conditions. And the hearing, the room was full. The board of both counties, two different hearings, they're expecting people to object it. They spoke for it, one after another. And that's how we build therefore, sometimes you have the law in the books, but you need to have a relationship. Because imagine if you have forced them by the law. You're going to be in that neighborhood for a long time. For how you need to build a relationship so that you can be able to work with people around you, rather than forcing yourself into it.
So
It's a great story.
just a footnote on how advocacy can make a difference, because I helped lead the coalition that passed the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Person Act that changed law to protect religious buildings that were being built from excessive interference against this. And right now, we are been working, led by Brian Schatz, senator from Hawaii, but there's a broad coalition of groups that are working together at a time of the homelessness crisis in America to change the rules that allows any of the churches that have downsized now to actually turn over their extra acreage or area to be developed into really good low-income kind of housing, and to ease the zoning restrictions that would allow that to happen here. So, we get these ideas from individual situations, and we try to translate it into lessons that can help more broadly. And it's a religious community, again, that's leading that fight on behalf of the homeless. I hope everyone caught this. He tried to sneak this through. I don't know about the Mormons. I don't know about the mosques. I don't know about I do know about the synagogues. That line I won't forget about, for my church, I only needed 23 acres.
It's a pretty good model, though. Buy 50, build the church, sell the other 25, and pay for the church. So, Bob, we admire your entrepreneurial capacity. So we only have about 10 minutes left, and I'd like to pose a question to each of you to conclude. Bob, I would like you to reflect a little bit on the question, why keep going? Because times are hard, there's a lot of conflict. It's one thing to start something which is a good program. It's another to persist in doing it. So my question for you is, why not give up? Because that sounds easier than continuing. For you, David, I'd like you to reflect a little bit on sort of getting beyond great statements. We've talked about how interfaith dialogue is good at statements, and what do we do to get beyond that? And Mohamed, for you, I'd like you to conclude for us by talking a little bit about before, during, and after. What do we need to do before the crisis? What do we need to do during the crisis? And what do we do after the crisis? And by crisis, I'm talking about the shooting at the synagogue. I'm talking about the burning of the mosque. What's the temporal before, during, and after of that? So, Bob, why don't we start with you, and then David, and then Mohamed will give you the last word.
I'm 66, and You don't get excited. I didn't when I turned 60. But the reality is there are some things that you can do in your 60s that nobody else can if you're willing to do it. At 60, if you've kept your life together, you have credibility, you have respect, you have results, you have a whole lot. Regardless of how much money you've got, if you've lived a good life and done right, you have massive credibility. I keep going because I don't want to stop leveraging credibility. What's happened, if I don't do it, who's going to do it? A young person generally is not. They're trying to get their church on the feet. You're going to have to pay a big price. I do it because I'm fascinated. I love the the Hebrew Scriptures. I'm sorry, Old Testament is what we call it. But they call it Hebrew Scripture, same thing. And I love it because Abraham was an old man when God called him. Moses was 80 when God called him. And I believe God's destiny for me is that my old age is the most important age for me, and to use everything that God's given me and throw my shoulder into it. That's personally why I don't stop, because I know if there's not many older guys that are going to do this. They're just not. But I can. And because I'm tied with credibility to my denomination and to all of the people over the years, I can get away with things that a younger person can't get away with. But I've also got to be willing to take the criticism, take the critique. Elder Soros just posted a picture of he and I together. I was at y'all's event Sunday, the general conference. And he asked me, it was very kind of him, he asked me in advance. And I said, you bet. And I think sometimes there are things worth paying the price for. And I think we've lost that in American culture. We want everything now, and we want to be celebrities. And we want fan clubs instead of people with prophetic voices. From our vantage point, these men have the same thing. I love these men with all my heart. I never dreamed, I didn't even think it was biblical. How could I be best friends with a non-Christian? He's not a Christian. Now, we debate one another's Christianity all the time, but he's not a Christian, are you, Magid? You are. I wish you were.
But I love the Christ.
Let's talk later.
I love Jesus.
Well, yeah.
I do love Jesus.
I know, but there's some differences there. David, I mean.
Really? Jesus is a nice Jewish boy.
I hear I'm so proud of you. That was a good joke, David. But I love them. And I've discovered we can do things together. We could never do separate. They cannot change what evangelicals think. I can't change all of evangelicals, but I can change a lot of them.
All right, David.
I'm sorry. And the same with Magid and David, and I'm very sorry. Forgive the preacher in me.
No, this is great. David, 2.5 minutes on moving beyond fancy, lovely statements.
I'm going to use one of those minutes to make a personal observation. If we're talking about the religious community and its relation to peace, I deeply appreciated what Katrina Lento-Sweat said about October 7th, about remembering the hostages, about Israel's right to defend itself. At the same time, I think every one of us knows that every child in Gaza who has died, in Lebanon who has died, every parent and grandparent who has died in the tragedy of what's going on, every one of those are also created in the image of the divine. Every one of those is a child of God also. Here, the tragedy of war is so immense. And if we're going to make a difference, one of the things that we have extraordinary statements that we have issued that lays a blueprint for what to do. And we stand by each other increasingly, both not just us, but the religious communities, I can't think of a single time there's been a desecration of a house of worship, there's been a shooting, there's been an attack of one kind or another, that the entire community in America is not rallied together to say, not in our name. This is not us. This is not what America is. And I know there are extreme voices right now that threaten to tear us apart. Certainly those who engage in hate crimes are not just engaged in crimes against individuals. It's against the idea of America. It's against holding us together, the tearing at the threads that hold us together about it. And when we stand together against that, we make a profound difference. But in the long run, I think at this moment of history, we have to have an entirely new approach to how we do this work. Rather than just talking about the ideas, we need to integrate into our conversations the strategies to give them traction on the ground, to figure out how we actually change things, how we make those statements real. I would love to have a conference devoted just to that cause. Take all of some of the great statements that have been issued in the last decade, and let's devote an entire conference to thinking about how do we change the way cities work? How do we change the way, how do we get countries to actually adopt us? What would adopting it look like that could feasibly be done? We need to have that conversation. But at the bottom line of all of this, the common message we have that I think we need more than ever before is this: we are not the prisoners of the mistakes of a bitter and unremitting past that we have made. We can be. We must be. If we live up to our values, we will be the shapers of a better and more hopeful future for all God's children everywhere.
Amen.
Thank you. Mohamed?
That's very difficult to follow. I really appreciate what you said about acknowledging the loss of life. In order for us to address any crisis, we have to have a relationship first. And therefore, before crisis takes place in any community, if there's no community resilience, if the community, they don't know each other, they don't work with one another, they will not be able to respond to the crisis. We have to build trust and relationship. And during the crisis, people really have to focus on the most vulnerable people. All the energy, all the resources has to be directed to the most vulnerable and the least people in society. And we have seen that happening in our relationship, whether addressing the Afghan refugees, welcoming them in MFNN, mosques, synagogue, churches have opened their door to welcome them, whether 9/11, whether the crisis we have now. I said we have a mosque in a synagogue. How can Muslims and Jews work in this difficult time? And then afterward, also, that how can we sustain it? I really believe if we don't involve young people in this work, if we don't have succession plan, we do the sacrifice, but we have to have young people involved in this. We have to have women involvement. We have to have the whole society get into building relationship so that we prevent, we have intervention, and sustainability. Those are the three things that need to be done in any crisis.
Brett, could I just say one thing just really quick? I want to publicly thank you for your work in religious freedom. I tell Baptists all the time,
Yes.
no one has done more to protect the religious freedom of Baptists around the world than a Mormon lawyer that I love with all my heart.
And on that, the three of us agree.
Yes.
Well, I hope we all understand what a special experience we've just had. It's not easy to get these three distinguished and significant leaders together on any occasion, and to have them here with us today is really meaningful for us. And I hope you also have a sense of why I revere, respect, and love these men so deeply. Please join me in thanking them, and then we will be on a 15-minute break before the next set of concurrent sessions.